All right, hey everybody. We're getting started here. Got Miles with me already. All right, looks like we're moving. Hey, Jeannie and Karen. Miles, your tendency to get on keyboards has gotten worse. And that's not a good thing. Hey, Chuck. Good to see you. Hey, Kathleen. Miles. Hey, Georgia. Hey, Pat. Glad the donation link works over there. Hey, Mona. Hey, Cindy in Detroit. Hey, everybody. We're just playing some show tune music today, instead of the usual Benny. I know I'm not monetizing this one anyway. We're just gonna go ahead and take the dings tonight. Nothing more they can do to me. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Mom. Imagine Dad, Scott, and Julie are there too. Hey, Scott and Julie. Hey, Susan. Look at this guy. Hey, Diane. And hey, Marie. Those of you who miss it, never fear, they'll be back up. Miles. Purr. Now, Katie, I appreciate it. I will pass it on, but if you can PayPal them instead so I don't end up with the taxes on it. You know. But whatever. All part of the donation. Hey, Lorena. Aw, Minnie, hey. Hey, Al. Up in Milwaukee. I'll be there on Saturday doing some door knocking. Yep, this is my game show jacket. My stereophonic t-shirt. Hey, homeless Satanist over on Twitch. You'd think the Dark Lord could get you some shelter. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Ronald. Hey, Lori. Diane, if PayPal's the only way you can donate, go ahead and do it to me and I'll pass it on. There are links, like this QR code, links over there. Hey, Mike. Hey, Oliver and Frosty. Every time you see a mustache, donate $5. You know, a lot of this stuff is pre-mustache era. Nah, there's plenty of mustaches. Good evening, everybody. Hey, Cassidy. Hey, Florecita. Hey, everybody. Got a whole different playlist tonight. All instrumental, though. Always a lot of Susans. Susans and Karens and Joannes and Laurens, oh my. Evening, everybody. Hey, Sherlock. I'm actually not drinking tonight. Well, I'm gonna have Coke. New orange kind. I always want to try the new flavors of everything. I haven't had a chance to try the blackberry Dr. Pepper yet, but that sounds good. Hey, Ryan over on Twitch. Can anybody who knows Snellville better confirm that the Snellville Performing Arts should be going to someone named Stephanie McDonald? Hey, Sally. Hey, Luca and Christy. Just made it. We had some cool performances tonight. Miles starting out by doing a regular jig over here. Yeah, a homeless Satanist. Most of the conversation is going to be on Facebook. There will also be some people on YouTube. I can see all of it. I can see all. Well secluded. I see all. Yes, indeed. Hey, Gene, thanks everybody for donating. Snellville needs what it can get. One does not normally hear me reminiscing about life in Snellville. It's never in my bios that I lived in Georgia. Evening, Bob. You can see some paws right here, yeah. Hey, Joanne. You look at this guy. Yeah, I didn't know if Miles would come with the music not being what he's used to. He's used to some swing music for these things. Now we're doing, this is from Newsies, this one. Go to New York on Wednesday. I always point out where the world was. The New York world. The world will know in the journal, too. I have to read the world in the journal all the time. Interesting papers, not your more reliable papers. Necessarily. Oh, Miles, what color are your beans? Show them your beans. They're kind of dark. I don't know what the deal is on Twitch comments. I'm never actually on Twitch. I just broadcast to it. Homeless Satanist, I occasionally do tours in New York. Usually, I do one called Grave Robbing 101 down in Phi Dive. But mostly I'm taking school groups around, so it's like Statue of Liberty, Times Square. Central Park. I don't make their itineraries. Mike, you can make requests. You can try. Everything's all kind of set up here, though. There are like 250 elements to this tour. There's a lot of them. Miles, you want down? All right. Say hi to everybody first. All right, everybody, welcome along. We got another song or two to go through before we'll start properly. Give it a couple of minutes for everybody to get logged on. A lot of people like reserved tickets on this thing. You don't need tickets, but a lot of people like names I don't recognize, people from Snellville, I guess, or thereabouts. It's a little more sedate than most of these, but this is a rousing song if you like punching Nazis. Clean and bright. Hey, Kristen. Hey, Lisa. Evening, everybody. Welcome to Mysterious Chicago. Tonight's a special being for the benefit of Snellville Performing Arts. So many rabbit holes to fall down in the research for this. I thought I knew most of these stories, but now there's always another little bit here and there. Some of them blew up to be way bigger than I thought. Okay, Christy Cassidy, can you confirm that if you go to the Venmo Snellville Performing Arts, there can only be so many of those, really? Is Stephanie McDonald the right name to come up? I don't need to behave. We're gonna be talking about punching Nazis. That's fine by me. Okay, it is correct. Thank you, Christy Bell Olds. I got the whole world in my hand. And it's held together with duct tape. Was there a Stephen King series with a song? I'm not sure. Hysteria, Chicago. Hysteria. Hey, Julius. Thanks, Jan. All right, we're going to let the playlist go through one more show tune here. It's about 2 more minutes. Then we'll be able to get started properly. I always give it a couple minutes after 8. Some people have to hit refresh. Some people have to email me in a panic like I can do tech support while I'm doing the show at the same time. And some people have to keep ordering free tickets. Okay. Well, come on out, everybody. Hey, Dad. Welcome along, everybody, especially anybody new coming down from Gwinnett County area. A shout out to Gene Hackman. We've all been wishing for the death of Lex Luthor and got mixed up in the mail, I guess. He said, Timu Lex Luthor. And to Michelle Trachtenberg as well. That really sucks. Of course, these things suck. All right. Welcome, Georgia people. Hey, Kathleen. Sue, Nebraska. Yes, that is the correct Venmo, Georgia. Everybody keep that up in the chat. Okay, if you can only do PayPal, go ahead and PayPal me. You all know my thing, and I'll make sure it gets passed along proper. But all right, everybody, I think it is time that we go ahead and get started. I didn't realize there was applause at the end of that song, but all right. Well, let's say this. That's what it sounds like to me, yes. All right, so here we go. People watching this later are going to wonder what the hell I'm talking about with the comments, you know. I wonder if that's often the case. But all right, welcome along, everybody, especially all of you down in Georgia. Tonight is a very special episode, as it were. Let's do a proper intro here.
Hi, my name is Lucas Seltzer. I'm Adam's nephew, and today's tour kindly supports Snellville Performing Arts, my theater company, and my second home. Snellville Performing Arts is a non-profit, all-inclusive theater company for everybody. We include dance, acting, singing, and full performances and productions. I call this place a second home because I've made so many connections with people, and I've learned to really be myself and be more confident in what I want to do when I'm older, to act. All donations go to Snellville Arts, and we thank you. Be kind, do good.
All right, thanks, Luca. Welcome along, everybody, especially those of you new this week. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 20 years. I did 3 years at South Gwinnett and 1 year at Phoenix down in Georgia, down around Snellville. At the time, there was nothing like Snellville Performing Arts down there. Nothing of the sort. There was not very much in town, just in general. Since then, I have put out about 25 books, including Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, H.H. Holmes' The True History of the White City Devil, and Graveyards of Trinity Church in St. Paul's. That is brand new from Arcadia Press. But I'm not an actor these days. I am on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time. What I do is a similar skill set, but going way back. Here is my brother and sister, that's Luca's mom, in The Wind in the Willows. This would be like 93, I think, 92, somewhere thereabouts. But welcome along. Today, though, is all for Snellville Performing Arts. We're going to be talking about Chicago history stuff, because that's what I know more about. We'll mix in some New York as well. But this is all a benefit for Snellville Performing Arts. We're going to have these donation banners down to the bottom the entire time. We'll bring the QR code back up at the end. Usually, we run about 40-45 minutes on these things before we do like a post-show hangout. This one, I don't really know. It's a brand new one. You can never tell with the new stuff. There were just so many cool stories to uncover here. So many things I was still working on it right up to about 20 minutes ago. But once again, Snellville Performing Arts is an inclusive space for everybody. They've got some full productions coming up. They have got Shrek the Musical. They've got Hadestown coming up. I saw that in New York a couple times over the last couple of years. It is just a fantastic show. And man, do Aeneas Mitchell songs stand out in a crowd. Once I should mention that I am not formally affiliated with Snellville Performing Arts. This is not an authorized production of theirs, so if I say something about punching Nazis or drug-addled Nazi Nepo babies ruining the country and you get mad at me for it, take it out on me, not on Snellville Performing Arts. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start well into the history of Chicago theater at a place, oh geez, I forgot to push these buttons down. We're going to start all the way down in the Loop, right across the street from the Goth Target, is the space you see right down here with this whole big square of light blue windows on Madison. Right at State and Madison, the very heart of the city according to the grid system. This was the site of McVicker's Theater back in the 1860s, right next to the green room where they sold pale ale, so it was occasionally known that people couldn't even hear the first act because everybody showed up drunk. But McVicker's Theater, 1865, April, there was a show going called Mazeppa. This is about a guy who is strapped to a horse and basically ridden through mud and hell. It's a show about torture. But on this particular day, one of the actors, a guy named J.E. Nagel, was talking to another actor named Mr. Pratt when a police officer came in and told his friend, hey, we need you down at the station a couple of blocks away for a second. Why don't you bring your friend? It's nothing serious. We'll all just have a drink as soon as we get this taken care of. So everybody shrugged, walked over to the police station, at which point the officer turned to his friend and said, sir, you are under arrest for the murder of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln had been assassinated just a couple of days before. John Wilkes Booth had been performing at McVicker's Theater just about a year and a half before, and a soldier had just been in McVicker's and said that he swore he saw John Wilkes Booth lurking around there now. There was still a massive manhunt out for him. Who he had found was really a guy named J.E. Nagel. And it was no mean feat to find this picture of this guy, but you can see the resemblance there. He really does look enough like John Wilkes Booth that this might have freaked people out a little bit. So, Booth had appeared there in several stints between 1862 and 1863, but this was a very momentous week for Chicago theater. Not only were people citing John Wilkes Booth back at McVicker's Theater, but also John B. Rice, the first person to open a proper theater in Chicago, had just been elected mayor, and Crosby's Opera House was supposed to be opening that day. However, it was delayed on account of all the news going on. We know how these things go. But this is, we're going to go back a little bit even further to the beginnings of modern American theater here in New York. This is a place known as Park Row today, across from City Hall Park. Down the block, you can see a little bit of St. Paul's Churchyard. The way it looked back in the day was like this. This was Broadway. A little bit further down than where what we think of as Broadway today, but this had like the Park Theater and Barnum's Museum. Now, this is Stephen Price. One day in 1801, he went to the Park Theater with his friend Philip Hamilton. They ended up sitting behind a lawyer named George Eaker and started acting obnoxious. Eaker called them damned rascals. He challenged both of them to a duel. Now, Philip, of course, was killed in that duel, Alexander's son. Stephen fought him to a draw. They both shot at each other and didn't hit. So they considered the matter settled. It should be pointed out that our founding fathers were a bunch of very, very strange people. But 15 years later, somehow or another, Stephen Price ended up owning the Park Theater and instituting the star system, where instead of just having a stock company, you would bring in the biggest stars from all over the place, including people like Junius Booth, who was brilliant as an actor when he was sober enough to show up. But he was also very scary. People doing sword fighting scenes with him would run away. One time, actors pulled him off of Desdemona when he was playing Othello. They thought he might be smothering her for real. And he might have been. This is an actor in the 1810s. There is no bigger group of party animals. Not rock stars in the 70s, not country stars in the 70s, not even late 19th century architects who were a bigger bunch of party animals than 1820s and 1830s actors. Now, Junius Booth grew up in England, where the first successful paternity suit against him was launched when he was 13. But he performed here at the Park Theater along with a guy named Harry Isherwood, who did not look like this at the time. He looked like a kid at the time, but he got his start in the stock company and painting sets at the Park Theater at a time when nobody had ever heard of a place called Chicago. But he'd be back. So this is the edge of Wolf Point in Chicago, the place where the two branches of the river come together right downtown. We'll go underneath the bridge here. Just get a beautiful, look at that beautiful canyon of buildings there. 400 LaSalle, the Merchandise Mart, the Nuveen building. But this is what this looked like about 20 years after Harry Isherwood got his start in the Park Theater. At the time of that drawing that we just saw a second ago, these buildings were not even here. There was one other building a little bit further away, but really Chicago just consisted of a couple of cabins as of this time. But this larger one here, the Sauganash Hotel, was a place where they would occasionally have entertainments. It was also incidentally the site where they would later build the wigwam where Abraham Lincoln was nominated for president. And just right below me here at McVickers Theater, while Lincoln was being nominated, the play at McVickers was Our American Cousin. It's one of the things I just found out while researching all of this. But here at the Sauganash Hotel, now there would occasionally be entertainments like the Potawatomi would come and do dances for tips. Also, Mark Babine, the owner, was known to play the fiddle there. He used to say, "I keep the tavern like hell and I play the fiddle like the devil." There was also a town crier, a guy by the name of George White. He and one of his buddies, a cook named Black Pete, that's what they called him, would gather at the Sauganash Hotel and play what we now call old-timey, well, country music is effectively what it was. This was all just kind of informal. The first real performance that we know of in Chicago, the first one you had to buy tickets to, took place in 1834 at a place called the Mansion House. Now we're on Dearborn right here. Coming up where the L tracks are is Lake Street. And if you turn a little bit to the right here, you'd be about where the Mansion House is. But this was a log cabin, really. I couldn't even find a proper drawing of it. There were a couple of old enough Chicago images. One of these houses over there on your left is probably the Mansion House. Or it might have just been this one. This is what State Street looked like in 1836. You do know about the Mansion House a little bit. If you're a regular around here, it was owned by Dexter Graves, whose grave is one of the most famous in Chicago, the one we know as Eternal Silence. Now, at one point in 1833, there's some reference to what may or may not count as a performance. It's not well documented, and it wasn't a very good performance, so we don't always count it. But a few people remember that in 1833, a guy did show up and charge 10 cents for tickets to see him doing some tumbling. This is acrobatics, but he did a couple of cartwheels, fell on his butt, hid behind a curtain, and then when they looked behind the curtain, dude was gone with all of their dimes. So this was more of a scam than an actual performance. But right here at the Mansion House in 1834 was our first proper performance. And for this one, I had to really get down. I'd read transcripts of this advertisement before, but I'd never actually seen it. So I went to the microfilm room. And the old Chicago Democrat of 1834, with all these ads for flour and butter, fruit, exhibition. It says the guy by the name of Mr. Bowers, a professeur d'études amusantes, was going to be doing a demonstration where he would imitate Chalbert, the Fire King. So basically, this was a tribute act. Chalbert was a guy who ate fireballs and licked red-hot irons, which is what this Mr. Bowers guy was going to be doing as well. So Mr. Bowers, we don't know very much about. He had done this before once in Cleveland that we know of, about a month before, and really that's about it. He did this twice in Chicago in early 1834, and then was never heard from again. Possibly he tried to eat a fireball on stage and died, for all we know. But there's this good line up at the top. Exhibition. Joy hath its limits, but we may borrow 1 hour of mirth from months of sorrow. Kind of heavy stuff. That is from a poem called The Magic Bridle by Allan Cunningham. And February in Chicago, 1834, that probably seemed like a good statement. It had been months of sorrow. It had been 3 months of Chicago winter. Before that, it had been cholera season. So going out to watch a guy eating fireballs probably seemed all right. Now, I mentioned we're going to have some performances over the course of this, and this, when I was reading this about the exhibition, the ladies and gentlemen of Chicago most respectfully inform that Mr. Bowers, Professor Tours Amusants, has arrived. It reminded me of Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. Those of you out there might be familiar with the Dead Ringers. I could only get one of the Dead Ringer quartet, but here with Being for the Benefit of Mr. Bowers.
At the mansion house of Mr. Gray, there will be a show Monday, the evening next. Mr. Bowers in Terrasson, Professeur Amusant, that's in French. He'll touch and lick a red-hot iron and even eat a supper of real fire. Then you'll see Mr. B's a ventriloquist. Celebrated Mr. B performs his feats on next Monday at Staten Lake. Mr. Bowers will entertain amusing feats and legerdemain. Don't be late. Mrs. B and G assure the public their performance will be second to none. 'Cause you know no other show's coming to town. Joy hath limits, we may borrow 1 hour of mirth from months of sorrow with Mr. B. And Mr. B will demonstrate, Chalbert he will impersonate, the Fire King. Commencing at early candlelight, a splendid time is guaranteed for all. And you'll see Mr. B is topping the bill.
All right. Thank you, Dead Ringer Quartet. That's Eli, of course. So, this is what we had to do in Chicago at the time. It wasn't like the only thing going on. You could also sit around and read the paper, which the same day as this ad also had a letter from Davy Crockett. I thought that was interesting. And also this fantastic ad. Hey, hey, hey! I really tried to find a song that has hey, hey, hey in it. It's a lot harder than it sounds. But next performance was right across the river. Now, we're coming at it from a different angle here, right beyond the Dave Matthews Band Poop Bridge at Kinsey Street. It's a long story for you non-Chicagoans. But right over there on the left would have been a place called the Traveler's House. You can see it right over there, also known as the Wolf Point Tavern. And a few months after Mr. Bowers did his act and then completely disappeared from history, there was a guy named Mr. Kenworthy who performed at the Traveler's House. He was a ventriloquist, but not the kind of ventriloquist we normally think of now with a dummy. He was doing the stuff where you throw your voice. You know, the kind of thing that they used to advertise all the time, where you made it look like your voice was coming from other places. They used to advertise this, like,
throw your voice, amaze your friends. Lots of fun, boys, fooling the teacher, policeman, or friends. Anyone can be a ventriloquist. Our 32-page book explains it all.
See, I did that while drinking. Is that amazing or what? Now, honestly, Mr. Kenworthy had a whole act where every theater he went to became Brombach Hall, and he had 8 characters from the Brombach family. Now, honestly, he was too big for Chicago in 1834. He had been performing for quite a long time. In Nashville, 2 years before, he had respectfully invited professors of religion to attend his performances, as it has been and will continue to be his aim to render it as chaste as possible. So, not a very good show, obviously. But then the next year he'll be playing at the American Museum right next to the Park Theater owned by Stephen Price out there in New York. So really, this was way too big of a thing for Chicago. He continued doing this for the next 6 years until his death in 1840. Couldn't find a picture of him. If he'd lived a little bit longer, we would have one. But those were really just tavern theaters. We're also going to check once back right here again. Right back across at the Sauganash Hotel. A few years after the reign of Mr. Bauer's reign of terror, as it were, at the Sauganash, a guy by the name of Harry Isherwood, who used to work down at the Park Theater in New York, arrived and started up a theater company that operated on the second floor of the Sauganash Hotel. Now, when he first arrived, he recalled that it was the most godforsaken place it had ever been my misfortune to see. The mud was knee-deep and there were no sidewalks. But that didn't stop people from coming to the shows. One of the early ones that we know they performed here was a show called The Deep, Deep Sea. This is what they called a burletta. It was a combination of burlesque and operetta. It had been a really big hit. It was a show about a sea serpent and various Roman gods. It makes absolutely no sense reading it. It's deeply problematic in many ways, being a show from 1834 and all. But it had been the hit of the year a couple of years before at the Park Theater in New York. Even then, we got things about 3 years after New York did here in Chicago. But there is actually the script for this is extant, and one of the songs in it actually has the melody built in. So here is an actual song from The Deep, Deep Sea, as performed in Chicago in 1837.
Yankee Doodle munching down, fat and lean and bony. I can swallow humankind as fast as macaroni. Mr. Now upon my soul is true as any rifle. Only you ask Uncle Ben who owes me that air rifle. Yankee Doodle munch 'em up, sense for me you cater. See if I ain't half a horse and half an alligator. Yankee Doodle munch 'em up, Yankee Doodle dandy. Breakfast, lunch, and dine and with your jaws be handy.
There you have it. Show tunes, 1837 style. Now, the newspaper watching it, for one thing, gentlemen and ladies present with children, both for amusement and instruction, will seldom find a better bill or a more deserving place to bestow their patronage. Similar to, you can see the links down below for Snellville Performing Arts. The Chicago Democrat said to say the whole audience was convulsed with laughter is giving a very faint idea of its success. A prominent portion of the audience consisted of those dear, sweet, bewitching creatures, the ladies. All right, so Isherwood occupied the second floor of the Sauganash until he went into another place, another log cabin that they called the Chicago Theater. And it was really just the back of a cabin, but it seems to have been a pretty good setup. There's no drawings of it, but it had a dress circle, it had chairs, it had statues and everything. Some of the sets were done by Isherwood himself, who had also worked at the park in New York, and also a guy named Joseph Jefferson, who came along with his 9-year-old son. This is a picture of him a little bit later, also known as Joseph Jefferson. In this case, we actually have some footage of this guy, and a little bit of audio. This doesn't technically match, but this is much later in life.
From Rip Van Winkle in the mountains.
Him doing Rip Van Winkle.
Joseph Jefferson.
I thought it was just amazing there was actually footage of somebody who performed in Chicago in 1837. This is a performance from about 1902.
Look at them there. They go head over his heel down the hill. Something must scare that dog. Ah, you both. Something must scare him.
He is now the namesake of the Jeff Awards, which are the Chicago version of the Tonys, the Chicago Theater Awards. It wasn't until 1847 that Chicago had a proper theater built, and that would have been right here on Randolph Street, where part of Block 37 is now, across from the Nederlander Theater. It's a place called J.B. Rice's. When J.B. Rice was a kid in Baltimore, he worked in his parents' shoe shop, but one day he was singing while he worked. Somebody walked down who worked at the theater and said, "Hey kid, you got a fresh sound," or something like that, and got him involved in the theater. Once he got the bug, it didn't leave him for a really long time. He eventually left it for politics. But he built Rice's Theater, this wooden structure right on that block we were just going down, opened in 1847. First show running there was a show called The Four Sisters, with Louisa Lane playing all four of the sisters. At the time, she was known in the playbills as Mrs. Henry Hunt. A couple of marriages later, she would be Mrs. John Drew, but Louisa Drew is the mother-in-law of Maurice Barrymore. She is the matriarch of the Barrymore acting dynasty. I can almost see some resemblance to her great-great-granddaughter, Drew Barrymore, hence the Drew in the name. But she was the leading lady in the stock company for quite a long time, but also early on in the run in 1848, Edwin Forrest came to town. He was one of the biggest actors in the world, bragged that he was never drunk, unlike most of the other actors, though a divorce trial showed he had other vices. But in June of 1848, he showed up and was such a big deal that they raised the prices from 50 cents to 70 cents. They opened with him doing Othello, with Louisa as Desdemona. Pretty soon he was also doing Hamlet with a guy named Mr. McVicker as the gravedigger. He was a comedian. He'll come up again. And eventually things like The Gladiator, too. So we get this picture of him. We got a lot more pictures of him. Here's one of him dressed as a gladiator. And nobody tried to pretend that they were just coming to this play for nothing. So he was a very big deal at the time. In fact, the next year in 1849, there was a riot over him. A riot between his fans and the fans of William Macready. Macready was English, Forrest was American. A lot of his fans got very America first about the whole thing. It was read to the Astor Place riot of 1849, which is partly a nativism thing and partly just taking stand culture way too far. Over 20 people were killed in this riot. Over 150 were injured. All over who was playing Macbeth at the Astor Theater. And this was a crowded weekend, too. At the same time that he was at Rice's Theater, General Tom Thumb was appearing at the courthouse. He's a P.T. Barnum protege. They billed him as the smallest man in the world. At this time, he was about 16 and doing an act where he did a lot of impressions, kissed every woman present, then posed in a body stocking that left absolutely nothing to the imagination to impersonate like Greek tableaus. That all went down to the courthouse. And if that wasn't enough competition, there was also some weirdo wandering around with a bagpipe driving everybody crazy that week, for reasons nobody could quite understand. And then in September of that same year, Junius Booth came. Now here's something to show you. This is the microfilm room where I was digging up some of these files the other day. And in this pile of letters, here is a handwritten letter from Junius Booth. Junius was one of the most famous actors of the day, probably best known today for being the father of John Wilkes Booth, also Edwin Booth. But he showed up here in September of 1848 playing Richard III, for which he dressed like this, once again with Louisa as his leading lady. And then doing Hamlet, once again with Louisa, now under the name of Mrs. Mosmer, playing Ophelia, and James McVicker as the gravedigger. But 1847, they decided they were going to do things a little bit differently at the end of the year. They decided, let's add an opera. You can actually, if you look on the sign here, there's this poster for Somnambula. That was the first opera they did. The second night they ran the opera, a stable back behind the place caught fire. People noticed it was getting hot. John B. Rice got on stage and said, "Stay in your seats. You don't think I would be so low class as to let a fire break out in this theater, do you?" Then a few minutes later, he came back and said, "All right, leave the theater as quickly as God will let you." The place burned to the ground, along with a tavern next door called the Shades, because they always pulled down the shades so nobody could see who was in it. But they rebuilt the next year, 1851. They built a brick one in just about the same location. And at that one, we'll get into her a little bit later, but Charlotte Cushman made her Chicago debut here, one of the first openly queer actresses. But 1858, we finally get to McVicker's Theater. This would be the most famous and certainly the one that would last the longest. Right, it would be right on the left where all those windows are. Now it's on the right. But 1864, McVicker's Theater. This is a picture of it from 1864. It had been there since 1858 by then. Operated by James H. McVicker, who by this time was a veteran, one of the most famous comedians operating in the country. Opened the place here with a grand opening in 1857, advertising that first-class legitimate stars were going to come eventually and will appear in rapid succession. And they did. McVicker himself was always on hand if they just needed a comedian, but then Charlotte Cushman showed up here and played Romeo. Now, she made $2,750 over the course of this. An Alton newspaper said over $1,000 a week is not bad wages for an unmarried woman. Now, Mahlon Ogden, a friend of hers that she visited in Chicago, said she was the most charming woman we ever met. Her information on all subjects appeared to be unlimited. She was witty to a brilliant degree, and when she chose to be sarcastic, she could cut like a razor. She was of masculine appearance, but one forgot her lack of facial beauty when she began to talk. She never, so far as I knew, and I knew her for many years, had any thought of marriage. Now, the fact that she played so many male roles in Shakespeare didn't really make anybody think that anything about her sexuality at the time, but more so in Europe than in the States, she was very openly a lesbian, but also an absolute huge hit, one of the most famous actresses of her day. Then in 1862, John Wilkes Booth did his first stint here. Now, he played most of the Shakespeare roles, most of the big ones where he has to give monologues about assassinating a head of state, which would have seemed very weird to people later on. This is one called The Apostate, which is a melodrama. But also he starred in Mackers. 15,000 people had seen him by that June of 1862 when he did Othello. A couple of people remember that towards the end of his stint, one day he was sitting around and started saying his favorite quote from Richard III and talking about how a person could really make a name for themselves by killing Abraham Lincoln. Now, this is his original prompt book. Now, people didn't really do Shakespeare as it was originally written at the time. There had been some rewrites done in the 1700s that moved things around, shortened things up, just kind of updated them for the times. But there was a line in the version of Richard III that they used that said, "Fame not survives more from good than evil deeds. The aspiring youth that fired the Ephesian dome outlives in fame the pious fool that raised it." Now, Booth quoted that while hanging around McVicker's, and someone said, okay, so the aspiring youth that fired the Ephesian dome outlives in fame the pious fool that raised it? Name that aspiring youth. And John was like, okay, so how famous was he really? In the interest of completion, it was Herostratus, who fired the Ephesian dome just to become famous. Now, early 1865, Mr. McVicker was writing to Booth again saying, hey, we really could use you around here. But by then, Booth was engaged in other things. Now, one of the people who tracked him down and helped kill him was a guy now buried here in Chicago up at St. Boniface Cemetery in an unmarked grave. It's a guy named Sergeant Andrew Wendell. When asked about the various theories that he wasn't really dead, he just said, well, he was dead enough when I looked at him. Now, at the same time that McVicker's was operating, so was Crosby's Opera House, which opened the week that Lincoln was assassinated, on the other side of the block from where Rice's was. It was the other side of Block 37, so it would be like around the corner from here. I don't have a proper video of it because there's never been a reason to take a video of the backside of Block 37 before. But Crosby's Opera House, a W.W. Boyington joint. We actually have some artwork of the inside of this one. You can see we've come a long way from the days when they were just operating out of a tavern. This was opened in 1865 by a guy named Uranus Crosby. Uranus H. Crosby. His parents must have been rather unlikable people. So, opened it right where Block 37 is now. It had its own waltz, and Edwin Forrest was lured back. Now, this was about 20 years after his last stint back at Rice's Theater. The rumor at the time was that he'd been so annoyed by criticism that he vowed never to return to Chicago. He kept that vow for about 20 years, but by the time he came back here, he was gouty. He was really kind of at the end of his rope, and the reviews were a little bit mixed. After the mixed review, he is said to have looked at one of the reviews and said, I will live to eat the goose that ate the grass that grows on the grave of the man that wrote that criticism. Now, I can't tell for sure, but I believe the man who wrote that criticism was probably the Tribune's drama critic, George Upton. who is buried at Oakwood Cemetery, which does in fact have a lot of geese eating the grass that grows on the graves. Unfortunately for Mr. Forrest, there is officially a no barbecuing rule. But on the other hand, they do have a barbecue pit right there and ready to go. So, opened in 1865. Now, in 1870, here in Crosby's Auditorium, Lydia Thompson came in along with her dancing troupe, the Blondes. Now, the Blondes were known as a burlesque troupe, and they came under the ire of a guy by the name of Wilbur F. Story, who ran the Chicago Times. Now, Wilbur F. Story ran the Copperhead Times. They were the anti-Lincoln paper during the Civil War. By 1870, he needed something new to rant about, so he was mostly talking about the theater. He wrote a whole thing about these people. He referred to them as notorious strumpets and really ripped on the management of the Opera House for letting them perform. And incidentally, the column next to that underneath me was saying that if we let black people vote, that is an endorsement of devil worship. Well, you all know what I think of Wilbur F. Story around here. Here's me at his grave. But Lydia Thompson got wind of what he was writing about her and did one of the best things anybody ever did. Come up to him on the street with a horsewhip and beat the crap out of him in front of a large crowd of people, then rush out of town. Now, incidentally, inside of the building was also the offices of the music publishers Root and Katie, who wrote up an entire opera house waltz. Here's a little bit of it. It's a banger. Frederick Root, who wrote this, was the son of the guy who wrote The Battle Cry of Freedom and various other Civil War anthems. He himself wrote The Parlor is a Pleasant Place to Sit on Sunday Night, whose verses became the lyrics to Ida Red by Bob Wills, which was then the template for Maybelline. So, besides being an opera house for people who horsewhip racist newspaper editors, this place really does have rock and roll in its DNA. Unfortunately, 1871, the Great Chicago Fire happened, and Crosby's Opera House was burned to the ground. So was McVicker's Theater, but McVicker's just rebuilt another one right on the same site. There's actually been 5 or 6 McVicker's Theaters. It lasted until the 1970s. But this one looked like this. C.F. Gunther's was down below, the store that introduced America to the joys of caramel. And he brought in Edwin Booth. Now, he'd already had John Wilkes Booth. He would have known Junius Booth from acting with him back at Rice's Theater. Edwin was generally regarded as the most talented of the Booths, probably the most famous actor of his time. And while he was acting here in the late 1860s, right before the Great Chicago Fire, he fell in love with Mr. McVicker's daughter, Mary, and married her. Now, one biography said this was probably the single biggest mistake he ever made in his career. Mary was not entirely sane. She was absolutely awful to him. She was absolutely awful to his daughter, Edwina, who she absolutely hated. But then in 1879, he was back at McVicker's performing Richard II when all of a sudden a gunshot went off. Now, he had been sitting there doing the monologue. It was one of the later ones, probably Graves and Worms and Epitaphs. For God's sakes, let us sit above the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. Usually he sat down doing that monologue, but this time he stood up, and because he did, the guy who was shooting at him missed. All of a sudden, this total crank just took a shot. So this was a big enough story that at the time it was on the cover of magazines. It was in every newspaper that somebody had tried to assassinate Edwin Booth live on stage. Here's a zoom in on that. Now, this would not have been drawn from life. This was a New York paper imagining it. But other people around quickly tackled the guy. It was awfully hard to reload in those days. Now, it turned out that it was a guy by the name of Mark Gray. Now, Mark Gray thought that he looked like Edwin Booth, I can kind of see it, and became kind of incensed. He even told people around his town in Keokuk, Iowa, that he was the son of Edwin Booth. But then he went to see him and decided, for one thing, oh my God, this guy isn't as good as I thought. But also, while Edwin was acting, he said at one point, Mark. Well, just a line in Shakespeare. But Mark Gray decided that when he said Mark, Edwin Booth was insulting him. So he shot him. He was quickly arrested, quickly found insane, did 3 years in an asylum, and then was let out, where he said he was going to go on stage himself, but as far as we know, he never actually did. Throw in one more thing from history here at McVickers Theater. 1881, there was a run of performances of a play called The Rivals. This was an 18th century play that was one of the most famous of the day. It still gets produced occasionally. It's got the character Mrs. Malaprop. We still talk about Mrs. Malaprop, isn't it? She was the very pinnacle of comedy, or as she would say, the very pineapple of comedy. But this starred Joseph Jefferson, that kid who had been at the Isherwood Theater that operated out of log cabins in Chicago more than 40 years ago by this point. By now, he was considered the most famous comedian anywhere, and playing Mrs. Malaprop in that same production was Louisa Lane Drew, the great-great-grandmother of Drew Barrymore. By this time, she didn't look quite the same anymore. She looked like this, playing Mrs. Malaprop. And her son-in-law, Maurice Barrymore, great-grandfather of Drew, was in the show as well. So really kind of a full circle thing for Chicago theater here. 1893, we had a World's Fair, quite a ways south of here. But right here where the CVS on Michigan Avenue is now, Florence Ziegfeld Sr., who ran the Chicago Music College, decided to cash in on all the crowds that were going to be coming into town for the fair and opened up a nightclub called the Trocadero. Now, to open the Trocadero, he traveled around Europe, found all of the greatest musicians that he could, all of the greatest bands, the most high-class acts anywhere. And when he opened this high-class nightclub, people stayed away in droves. So he brought in his son, who seemed to have a better sense of show business, or a little more flash. His son was Flo Ziegfeld Jr. Now, Flo Ziegfeld Jr. brought in Sando the Strongman. This is some film footage of Sando from around this correct time period. He went on stage dressed only in what we would now call a Speedo, and performed feats of strength. For an extra fee, women could come up and touch him later. Usually a very big one. Like he would have, Flo Ziegfeld would go on stage and say, now anyone who donates $300 to charity may have a private audience with Sando the Strongman. He knew that people like Bertha Palmer would be too ashamed not to make the donation once it had come up. So this became a vaudeville house, and then it started making money. Things had been kind of changing in the theater. Things had been moving over from legitimate theater to vaudeville as the 20th century came around. Flo himself went to New York and started the Ziegfeld Follies, and he's sometimes referred to as the man who invented show business as we know it. But even the opera houses at the time were starting to go vaudeville. Like right over here, this is City Hall today. Just beyond it, you can see that cream-colored building. That would be the site of the Chicago Opera House that opened in 1890. Initially, it was showing only the most high-class theater, but by 1895, it had been converted into a vaudeville house. And that particular year, you can see Miss May D'Souza was going to be singing a song by Bathhouse John Coughlin. Now, Bathhouse John was one of the first ward aldermen. We had 2 aldermen per ward in those days. For those of you not from around Chicago, aldermen are like the mayors of neighborhoods. John was a big, gregarious guy. Late in life, they just gave him jobs like promoting Straw Hat Day. Like here he is practicing putting on his straw hat like a big boy. But really what he did, the first ward was one of the most notoriously rough hoods in the city, and it was like the red light district and all of that, and he was getting murderers off the hook. He was the guy that you wanted to come to with money if you needed to be off the hook for anything. If you were doing something kind of illegal with your business, he was the guy to make the payoff to. But on the same time, he was also into writing songs. Or at least he said he was. Nobody's entirely sure if he was really writing these himself, but he almost certainly at least wrote his first one, Dear Midnight of Love. So he wrote this song around 1898, and then for a solid year and a half, he sang it to friends who I'm sure were just thrilled. In 1990, it was announced that it was going to be performed here at the Opera House. Now, at the time they asked if they could publish the words and the music in the newspaper, he was quoted as saying, they wrote this in dialect, he said, "Say, pal, is yous guy and me give up the words and music of me song, Dear Midnight of Love? Nixie, pal. Those folks what wants to hear it must buy tickets. On the dead level, though, it's a corker. Say, I sings it to Hinky Dink the other night, and he cried like a baby, sure ting. Everybody knows me and knows I'm gonna conduct the song in purpose. That'll fill the house sure, see?" I could really do that as like an Edgar G. Robinson. That'll fill the house sure, see? But to sing it, they brought in a young woman named May D'Souza, who was the daughter of a detective, and probably a detective who was getting bribes from Bathhouse John Coughlin. The song was absolutely a flop, just as everybody knew it was going to be, but it did launch May D'Souza's career. And she had a multi-decade career. She was on Broadway up through the 1910s, up through about the next 20 years, until she got married and moved to Shanghai, and then during World War II ended up in prison for a while. But she was in prison when the Japanese invaded China. But for a while, she was on the cover of magazines and everything. All because she had sung Dear Midnight of Love. Now here's the review of it. "There will be a general feeling of relief that Alderman Coughlin has at last been delivered of his tum-ti-tum song, Dear Midnight of Love, with which he has menaced the community for so long. It is to be hoped that he will be so satisfied with its reception that he will not feel called upon to compose another, at least until this one has decomposed." But here's the thing, folks. He kept on writing songs. He wrote songs with titles like She Sleeps by the Side of a Drainage Canal, Why'd They Make Lake Michigan So Wide, So Awful Wide? Or here, now we're only going to give you about 45 seconds of this one because no matter who's singing it is about all that anybody can possibly take. But here, everybody, with Bathhouse John Coughlin's Ode to a Bathtub. We had to come up with a tune for this. Here's the thing.
Enjoyment in travel and seeing those majestic views. Some take to traveling by railroad in order themselves to amuse. But for me, there is only one pleasure, although you may call me a dub. There is nothing to my mind that equals a plunge and a porcelain tub.
All right. We could have done Why'd They Make Lake Michigan So Wide, So Awful Wide, but it's a really long song. Not necessarily a highlight of Chicago theater when Bathhouse John showed up. But one other thing here, we're going to go a little bit back to New York. So this is St. Paul's Churchyard, across the street, or across the park, a very small park, from the old Park Theater. Now, this is the grave of a woman by the name of Frances Harper. In 1787, way back, she was one of the most popular comedians of the day, part of the American Company of Comedians, played in a show called The Recruiting Officer. Now, The Recruiting Officer was a play about a woman who disguises herself as a man to become a soldier. And she did a whole military routine in this. And one of the newspapers, the Daily Advertiser, argued that this was in poor taste because she was exciting the ladies too much. Really kind of America's first drag panic. Now, writing of it, Farquhar, the author, wrote for an age and court distinguished for depravity, deism, and voluptuousness, and it deserves to be recorded that his most obscene play, afflicted by the exercise of a female martinet, was countenanced in a republican city where delicacy and innocence of manners should prevail. This is 1787. The Constitution was still being debated. Some people thought we really ought to turn this nation into, I don't know what they thought New York was going to be like. But St. Paul's Church, well, here they are today. Things have changed a little bit over there. Well, we're also going to go back back in Chicago at Rice's Theater in 1848. We talked a bit about Edwin Forrest making his big debut here. One thing he is credited with while he was here in Chicago was making a speech from the stage after the curtain call, which, as far as they knew, nobody in Chicago had ever done before. So, 1848, June, after one of his performances, he got onto the stage and made a speech big enough that it was in all the papers the next day. We'll put on just a bit of it. Just an excerpt of it here. Wherever civilization has spread its humanizing influence, the drama has been upheld by the wise and the good, and although from time to time it has been bitterly assailed by intolerance, bigotry, and fanaticism, and so scowling bigots still denounce the theater as they once denounced the inspired teachings of Galileo, yet it has triumphantly withstood their attacks, and will continue to do so long as there is taste and refinement in the world to appreciate the genius of Shakespeare, or so long as man is composed of those elements which the great bard of all time has so truthfully depicted. All right, so once again, everybody, that was the early history of Chicago theater. This has all been a promotion for Snellville Performing Arts. They're going to be doing Shrek the Musical in Hadestown soon. All donations tonight are going to them. Let's put on some Benny Goodman like we normally do. Here's Benny coming from the Congress Hotel here in downtown Chicago, and now we will just hang out like we always do. Thanks, everybody. Interesting comments. He needs a comb versus amazing hair. I'm going to go with the amazing one myself. But thanks, everybody. Now, if you go to SnellvillePerformingArts.com, I believe there are other donation options. And thanks, everybody. That was a lot of rabbit holes to go down. I was still looking up stuff on Mr. Kenworthy the Ventriloquist. The only time he's come up in books in the last century is just because he played in Chicago in 1834, but he had a big career. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Eli. Thanks, Luca.
Hotel in Chicago. And first of all, one of Irving Berlin's greatest hits, Blue Skies.
Usually we start the Benny about halfway through this set for the post-show. Do I think the Booth family knew of John's plans? Nah, he wasn't hanging around that much. I know Edwin had gotten so sick of his talking about secession crap that he kicked him out. Thank you for posting the link there, Heather. Thank you, Christy. And thanks, Luca. I know you're out there. Thanks, Dad, for sending that picture from this morning. That was a rough. That was a lot of elements to put into one tour. Honestly, it was. I was still working on that like until 20 minutes ago before it started. Yeah, any new folks out there? We also have the Mysterious Chicago Regulars fan page. I'm not a member of that one. Well, that's on Facebook. Normally we do these every Thursday night. Next Thursday will be an exception because I will be in New York, and I think the Thursday after that as well. One of my side gigs is taking school groups around New York. I'll be seeing Great Gatsby on Broadway 3 times in the next 6 weeks, I think, with different groups. And I'm also going, on Wednesday, I get in the night before the group arrives, so I'm going to see Oh Mary. And I'm also seeing Hell's Kitchen, Little Shop, and some others with the kids, too. It's a pretty sweet gig. I'm actually on the clock. I don't know how many times I've even seen Wicked now. Yeah, usually every day at 10 o'clock, it'll be 11 Eastern time, I do a morning mini tour as well. I can't always do that when I'm out with the school group, but often I can. Oh yeah, I'm not plugging my own stuff tonight, but you can find the stuff. You look up Mysterious Chicago, you'll find all the other stuff. In-person walking tours will be starting up pretty soon. The Patreon has lots of great stuff. We'll be covering a lot of this stuff in a little more detail on the Patreon this summer, probably. I'm posting way ahead. I'm going to be on the road so much the next few months with the school groups and following the Bob Dylan tour that I wanted to make sure all the Patreon is set up ahead of time. There's mostly Chicago history stories there, plus some photography. But tonight, don't worry about that. Donate to this while I sit here using a juggling ball as a fidget spinner. Don't I have a fidget spinner around here someplace? Those things were kind of too easy to lose, you know. Okay, I see a few people had to donate by PayPal, but I will make sure that SPA gets that. Okay, I was just texted how much you guys have donated. Thank you guys so much. That is incredible. Thank you so much. I did not expect that. All right, I knew you guys would come out for this event. But all right, I am feeling good right now. And I'm not minding this zero sugar orange cream Coca-Cola either. It's only been like the last year, all of a sudden on an airplane, it's like, I want a Diet Coke. Normally I would have smacked myself upside the head for wanting such a thing. But we are over $1,000 tonight, everybody. Diet Pop is almost like having a cocktail, because, you know, it's kind of yucky. Yeah, I normally make a thing of I never say how much I'm making off of these things. I will say it's less now than I used to be. Normally. But yeah, tonight we are over $1,000 for Snellville Performing Arts. Thank you all so much. And more of it still coming in. Fantastic. Plus, that was one of the most... that was a lot of fun at the Research Archives. Let me show you guys, while we're all hanging out here, some of the things. Newberry and Dole show up occasionally. Mr. Newberry eventually died at sea and was his body was reserved in a barrel of rum. It was kind of cool to see an ad for his business. There's also the Davy Crockett letter. Hey, hey, hey! I guess there's a hey, hey, hey in Dear Evan Hansen, but it's not my favorite show. Butter! Butter! Flour! More flour! Blasting powder. James H. Collins, big abolitionist. Major Underground Railroad player until his death in 1854 of the cholera epidemic. Hoosiers, Wolverines, and Suckers. That's people from Indiana, Michigan, and Illinois. We used to be known as the Sucker State. No one knows exactly why. Philo Carpenter, another big Underground Railroad guy, also selling drugs. And medicines, oils, paints, and dyestuffs. Or this letter about the condition of the graveyard. That was great to see. The Daguerrean Saloon. What was that? Oh yeah, and just going through all these like stack of letters. It was letters to a theater in Buffalo that I guess came into the possession somehow of Will J. Davis, the theatrical manager in Chicago. There was stuff like from Charles Keene, Julia Dean, and Junius Booth just sitting there in a pile. You find the wildest things in archives. I want to try the Blackberry Dr. Pepper, but, you know, I've only seen like 12 packs for $10. I got my limits, you know. Yeah, we'll keep on hanging out. We always just kind of hang out here. I'm always wired after doing these, so I might as well just kind of hang out. Keep listening to some Benny Goodman. Keep fidgeting and drinking stuff. Listen, the history of theater in Chicago was documented well enough in the early days that I was at least able to know what to look for in the microfilm room. Most of this stuff has been digitized by now, but not the 1834 stuff. And not all of the papers. Like the Journal had some really good John Wilkes Booth coverage that wasn't in the other papers. Kristen, I haven't run into that yet, but hopefully I will. Going to Wisconsin. You can always count on finding interesting foodstuffs in Wisconsin. We're going there on Saturday to door knock for the state Supreme Court race. Yeah, and then Sunday will be the Oscars. We usually go. Did we figure out any more about Dylan's Frank James Insta-reel? No, we didn't. It really seems like it's something he wrote himself. Certainly we haven't found anything to suggest that this was something that existed before. That took up a chunk of the day as well. But anytime I needed a break from theater stuff, I was like, okay, back to Frank James. But there are a few of us in the Dylan community who have some research avenues and resources. Though, if this was a lecture that Frank James had actually given, or even like a reasonable counterfeit one from years ago that had been published before, we would have found it. Normally when Dylan posts a reel, it's just like a clip from a movie or a music clip. This was sandwiched in between a clip from the best years of our lives and a clip of the rapper Machine Gun Kelly doing an in-store. But it's another musician named after an outlaw like Frank James. And a lot of the monologue of Frank James is about being a soldier readjusting, a soldier outliving his time, which is the theme of Best Years of Our Lives. We never know what he's on about. You know, when Taylor Swift leaves all these breadcrumbs out, she'll eventually give you the answer key.
Music by Benny Goodman is being presented from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown.
Megan, I had no idea that one myself. I just randomly saw a reference to it. I'm kind of surprised I didn't know it. I've been through like those 1860 newspaper archives. Shout out Dave Taylor from the Lincoln Conspirators website, who had that picture of J.E. Nagel, the actor who was arrested on suspicion of being John Wilkes Booth. I dug and didn't find that one. But he had it. It's in this like big carte de vista. Let me see if I have what I did with the whole thing here. I don't know where I put the rest of it. There ended up being in the folder for this, 194 objects. And they did. There's ones from other folders too. See if I can find where that is in the folder. I can't remember what I called it. Oh, here we are. It was a whole thing that looked like this. Whole bunch of actors of the day. If you play Where's Waldo? Where's J.E. Nagel? Not as many have mustaches as you'd think. I can see Edwin Forrest there. John Wilkes Booth is up towards the top. Tom Hamblin is in the middle there. Junius Booth is there. And Tom Hamblin, who managed the Bowery Theater in New York and was very possibly a serial killer. He's number 39 or 40, I can't quite tell. But down at the bottom is J.E. Nagel. And thanks everybody for supporting Luca out there and Snellville Performing Arts. We know Luca will break a leg in Hadestown. I really love that show too. I saw it a couple times, and the first time I saw it, the next day the kids that I was with at a workshop, I happened to pass the guy who had played Hermes in the hall and brought him in.
Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Yeah, the numbers for each photo are because there's also on the back of it, it gives you like the answer key. Yeah, Tom Hamblin, serial killer. I didn't end up having room for the graveyard of all of his victims in the New York Cemetery book. If I can do a volume 2. But so far I have had like no comments or reviews or anything or press on that book. Dan Marble was in Chicago. Nagel. Harry Perry was in Chicago. He got kicked out. Charlotte Cushman was doing As You Like It, and he showed up so incredibly drunk to play his part that he was banned from McVicker's Theater on the Stite. Up McCready, the other half of the Riot, in 1849. Charles Keene, I just had saw some letters from him. The son of Edmund Keene, who was said to be one of the most depraved of them all. Yeah, there's the name Stephanie will come up on the Venmo. Yeah, Tom Hamblin, the serial killer, he had a lot of young women who were his proteges and wives, and they tended to die. He was accused of having killed them at the time. Like, one of them was the daughter of his favorite sex worker. But he took her on as a protege and then married her. And then when she died, he married a woman named Louisa Medina, who became one of the bigger playwrights, one of the first women to really make a living as a playwright. Then she mysteriously died, and may have helped him poison a couple of people beforehand. She definitely knew what was going on. It's kind of an Amanda Palmer situation. She either knew or must have known. Megan, absolutely. Maybe another time we can do like the 20th century version of this. I thought I was going to go like all the way up to Ganowalska, Mrs. Insel, the nightclub scene, you know, more. State Street, that great street where they do things they don't do on Broadway. No, I ran out of time. There's too much cool stuff in here. Hey, Crit. Park Avenue and it all over town.
You see them shuffling, trucking along. It spread like a forest blaze, became a craze and sang to Harlem now.
Everybody's trucking. I enjoy the new episode of Severance, Susan. I'm watching the new School Spirits myself. Hey, Priya. There comes Priya. You can see her under the sign a little bit there. You want to come up here, Priya? You want to come up here? She'll climb all over you, but she's gotta come to you, not the other way around.
The Alamo.
Is Tiger Beat still a thing? Is the QR code working that well that I should go back to trying to use those myself? It didn't seem to work that well for me, but I was using smaller ones, you know. Jan, have a good show. Oh yeah, Find a Great Friday. I gotta get tomorrow's Patreon up. I haven't done all of the serial killer tier ones, the Friday post yet. I'm up through the end of May. Then I can do like the whole rest of the summer just on stories from this. I gotta do one about when Edwin Forrest came to town. I gotta do one about Tom Thumb coming to town. They said any girl who hadn't gotten a kiss from Tom Thumb felt like a spinster who'd never been asked to be married. It was the place to go to be kissed, going to see Tom Thumb. He estimated by then he was 16, he estimated he'd kissed over 1 million women. And then posing in what was supposedly a body stocking, but drawings have it make it look like it must have been a real tight body stocking. Weekly allowance in 1992. Well, let me tell you, when we're talking to that. This arrived in my mailbox. It's just some junk mail, but it's got this glossy coating. It smells just like Star Wars Galaxy trading cards, Series 1. And I was just like literally sitting there huffing my junk mail. And instantly it takes you to the comic book shop. Smell of comic book shops in summer, poly bags and glossy coating.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Huffing Junk Mail, that is a good band name. I've had a run of thinking of good band names lately. Let me pull up my Evernote. What were the ones that I thought of this past few days? Soda Roach. I thought there was a band called Soda Roach, and I realized they had some whole other name, so okay, I take it. Roadkill Frankenstein. I Got Winter. Who Are You, What Do You Want? There's not a band called Who Are You, What Do You Want? Oh, Tiger Beat is not a thing anymore. All right. Okay. I just saw the comment from Snellville Performing Arts up there. Thank you guys for replying to that, so I noticed it. We already have a matching donor who is matching up to $1,000 in donation. We got here the rest. That's $2,000 for a nice inclusive space. If it won't go through with the QR code, try, there's the Venmo there, or go to SnellvillePerformingArts.com. You'll be able to find some more there. Yeah, we could do this more often. I mean, I did the, I just did Bob Dylan Fans for Harris back in August. That wasn't just you guys. That was a wider poll. That one made some good money, but there was a matching donor for that one too. This is still a portion of my income, though, you know. These things, these donations. I mean, it's not, you know, during the pandemic, it was like my whole income. And it's all right then. I don't make nearly as much of a tour now as we did then. But that's all right. You know, it was always supposed to be promo for the walking tours anyway. Laura, absolutely, I did hear about that. Yeah, next time we do this, we can do the. Well, you know, I rerun these things about once a year, but I can also do a 20th Century Theater one. Then you got to get clear into like Ike Bloom's Frolics, the Rendezvous Cafe, Bronzeville, and the Cozy Cabin, the Black Drag Club of the 1930s. That comes up on a few of the tours as it is. Hey, Miles. Yeah, well, Pat, you know, we couldn't do walking tours during the pandemic. So, hence. But also we would have numbers like 600, 800 people watching virtual tours in those days. Now we got more competition, you know. Oh, Miles. This guy is purring and purring over here. Where's Priya end up? He's like, who cares? I need to reread Great Gatsby. Reading fiction is difficult for me. I've read it enough times, and I'm about to see the play like 3 times as a musical. At least 3 times this year. Possibly more. I was afraid it was going to be nothing but The Outsiders, which is a good show, but I only needed to see it the once. Walking tour season is starting up pretty soon. The big season's really not till fall. But if you're coming into town, let me know on a given weekend. I can just list one for that weekend. I make the rules here. Once again, normally we do a tour every Thursday. Let me check my calendar. Next week, I know we're going to be... I'll get something posted for like a couple of weeks hence. Yeah, next week... Okay, we've only got... Yeah, next week I'll be in New York. Week after that, and the week after that, I will not. But then I'll be in Nashville, and then... There's just a brief couple of windows. There's going to be a lot of nights in April. Maybe we can have Mandy cover for me.
We have been presenting the music of Benny Goodman and his orchestra from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel.
Kathleen, yeah, I'll be seeing Great Gatsby at least 3 times in the next couple of months. I'll be seeing, before the group comes in, I'm going to Oh Mary by myself. That's something I'm able to do, is like stereophonic. No, I didn't have a group see stereophonic, so I saw it myself. I will definitely not have a group seeing Oh Mary. But to see that, I'll see Hell's Kitchen, Little Shop, which I saw with Jinx Monsoon playing last year. The teachers from the Catholic school that I took to it didn't want to express why they were disappointed, but Heather, no, I'm not doing the St. Louis Dylan show. There's several of them within about a 3-hour radius of me, so I'm doing those ones. I'm doing, let's see, Davenport, West Lafayette, Peoria, Green Bay, Fort Wayne, and South Bend. And then about a month after that, Phoenix. Yeah, well, I did take a group to see Death Becomes Her last year when it was in previews in Chicago, and they insisted on leaving at intermission. Now, these kids were 18, but very, very small town. I had to go back and see it again so I knew how it ended. I mean, I've seen the movie, but I wanted to see how they did some of those effects. Yeah, certain groups, if it was a group for California or something, they would have been fine. Yeah, it was definitely, Death Becomes Her was more adult than they expected, I'm sure. But, come on, nothing the kids haven't seen on TikTok. These kids nowadays with their Hannah, Nebraska, and their skibbity-bobbity toilets, and whatever else I'll learn this year. Well, all right, everybody, we have run out of the Benny Goodman, but thanks, everybody. These links will continue, SnellvillePerformingArts.com. If none of these work for you, just head over to there. There are other donation options. But all right, thanks, everybody, for helping out. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Thanks to Luca, thanks to Eli, thanks to everybody, thanks to all of you for making this a good night for Snellville Performing Arts. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago saying stay safe, stay strong. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock Central, 11 Eastern for Find a Grave Friday, where we go to a cemetery where I know somebody's buried, some particular person, but I don't look up where they are or what it looks like. We figured that out in the comments. But thanks a lot. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. See some of you in the morning for that. And until then, stay safe and stay strong. And of course, if you can, do stay spooky, everybody. Have a great night.